All right, so these are the newly announced XPS 17 and XPS 15 from Dell. The XPS 17 is brand new. Like, they've never had an XPS 17 that was metal and carbon fiber. They had some really old school stuff like 10 years ago, but this is the first time we've seen a 17-inch device from Dell that is made in this kind of form factor and this kind of design aesthetic. It's something special. And the 15-inch has finally been redesigned. This is something that's been around for like 4 or 5 years where they just kind of kept refreshing it over and over again. It's brand new this year, fully re-engineered from the bottom up, and we're going to get into both of them. Now, these are both engineering samples. I've had them for about a week. I've been able to play with them, and we'll go in. Okay, 17-inch model. We'll start here because this is the thing that's gotten me super excited. This is their flagship laptop. It's going to be the king of the XPS lineup, and it looks very similar in terms of design aesthetic to the XPS 13. It's just a lot bigger because it's a 17-inch screen. But the 13, the 15, and the 17 all have this kind of angled design aesthetic to them, and they're all built from unibody chassis. So they're built from a single block of aluminum that's kind of milled out with a CNC machine. It just gives like strength and rigidity and a particular aesthetic to the devices. Now, the 17-inch model and the 15-inch, but particularly with the 17, the most striking thing this year is the screen. It's a 17-inch panel, 1080p or 4K, but both panels are super bright at 500 nits, good color accuracy. This one is a 4K panel, and it's awesome. Like, the panel itself is really nice. It's vibrant, it's sharp, and it's touchscreen. It's got all the good stuff that you would expect on a high-end 4K panel, and it's also a 16:10 aspect ratio, so there's a little more vertical space for people whose workflow or apps can make use of that. But the real kicker here is the bezel. It's super thin the whole way around, like the top, the sides, the bottom. It's essentially fully screened. There's no chin, there's no forehead. It's very clean. Now, when I did my first XPS 13 review, that was a device that was very special for its time. Like, when that first came out, the entire industry was making devices with thick bezels around the laptop screens. So that XPS 13 really stood out. And I think it started to shape the way that laptops were made. Like, manufacturers started to understand that people wanted this, not just for a design aesthetic, right? Obviously, this looks nicer with a thinner bezel, but it actually makes devices smaller. Like, when you can fit a 17-inch screen into a smaller footprint like this, the whole device becomes smaller. Like, this is a smaller laptop than a lot of 15-inch devices. Like, the actual footprint of this thing is smaller than like half of the 15-inch laptops out there right now. It's pretty crazy. The trim is so small on the bottom that if you look at it at the right angle, you can't see any bottom bezel at all. It looks like the screen just pops out the back of the keyboard. Now, it still has a webcam up top. It's a 720p cam, and it does support Windows Hello for face login, so they've been able to pack an infrared camera into that top bezel. The keyboard has also been reworked. It's not a maglev keyboard or anything. It's just kind of like a standard layout XPS keyboard. It feels nice, 1.3 millimeter travel. It's got some bigger keys than before, about 10% bigger than the previous model. And this keyboard is shared between the two models. So the XPS 17 and the 15 use the exact same keyboard. Very easy layout to get used to. I think a lot of people will enjoy this keyboard. The one thing that you should take note of in case you're used to older XPS keyboards, the page up and page down keys no longer have dedicated keys for them. You have to hit function up and down to access that. So if you're someone that used that frequently, you're gonna have to get used to this on these new devices. There's also a fingerprint sensor on the top right of the keyboard. So if you don't wanna use your facial biometrics to log in, you can use your fingerprint. And the keyboard deck is also slightly different this year. It's still carbon fiber. It's got that like nice soft resin feel to it. This is something I really like. This is a material that if you've never used an XPS device before, this is one of its best features. Like, that carbon fiber weave is nice to look at, it's durable, and it feels awesome, but they've changed the layout of it slightly. So it's got carbon on the top and bottom area of the deck, but the sides of the keyboard are just plain plastic, and those house these new speakers. So these are significantly improved from the older XPS 15. This is something I complained about in basically every single XPS 15 review I've done over the past 4 years. These are so much better than the old ones. They're top firing, so there's a pair firing up and there's also a pair firing down, and they sound way better. They still don't sound as good as a 16-inch MacBook Pro though. I really like the carbon fiber material, but it would have been awesome if they would just match the front material as well. Not necessarily made out of fiber, but just to have like a black front. You can get skins from, I use D-brand ones, which look pretty good, but if this thing was fully black with like a black trim, that'd be on another level. Okay, so the inside, the trackpad, they have a much bigger one this year, but in terms of how it tracks and how it feels mechanically, it's very similar to the previous generation, which is a good thing because they've always had a decent trackpad on the XPS lineup. In terms of ports, so we got 4 USB-C that support Thunderbolt 3, and there's also an increasingly rare SD card reader. So if you're a photographer or a videographer and you want access to your media, it's built right into the device. Now this guy does not have an HDMI port anymore. So all the older XPS 15s have had them, but this device now has a adapter that has both the USB-A and an HDMI out in one adapter. But that thing did not come with these engineering samples. All right, so to power both of these, they use a 130 watt adapter that connects over USB-C, but you can use some lower wattage stuff if you want to charge these devices. All right, let's take a look at the inside. The XPS 17 has 2 NVMe's, both upgradable. It's got 2 RAM slots, also upgradable. The Wi-Fi card is baked on, so you can't swap that, and you have your standard big boy 97 watt hour battery. But the beauty of this device is its new thermal system. The XPS 17 now runs a vapor chamber, a way more efficient way of removing heat from this laptop. Now this is an early engineering sample, but from what I've seen from my benchmarks and gameplay, this is very impressive. Like, this is so much better than anything we've ever seen from Dell's XPS lineup. It is really good. So the XPS 17 is running these 10th gen Intel chips up to an 8-core. It's also running up to an RTX 2060 Max-Q. I believe this device starts at $1,500. Here's the thing. It is not a gaming laptop. As powerful as this hardware is, I think a lot of people look at this stuff and they're like, that's a gaming laptop because it's got an NVIDIA card in it. It isn't. I mean, they don't market it like that, so I wouldn't expect a device like this to compete with like a thick boy gaming laptop, but it is very impressive, and I'm considering switching to this machine as my daily driver. Okay, enough with the XPS 17. Let's talk about the XPS 15. This machine is also very impressive this year. Redesigned, revamped. It's very similar in design to the 17 and 13. It's got the same kind of exterior build. This device, however, has only 3 USB-C ports. It's got 2 on the left and 1 on the right, and only the 2 on the left support Thunderbolt 3. The one on the right does not. It still has the SD card slot for media. Now, if you look at the size of, like, this is the previous model of XPS 15. I forget, I think the 9570. This device, the new one, is smaller than the old 15-inch by a very noticeable amount. It's kind of weird that they're able to pack the same kind of screen size in there in a much smaller footprint. But that's what thin bezels give you, right? When you shrink down that bezel, you can shrink that whole device down. The screen is still super bright on the 15 and color accurate. It still has that webcam up top for Windows Hello, and it's all wrapped in this really thin bezel. Like, this is a much better looking device than the XPS 15 from last year. This is a better looking device than like the vast majority of laptops right now. This thin bezel is so cool. The keyboard is the same as the XPS 17. It's a very functional keyboard. A lot of people like it. And the trackpad's also one of those big trackpads, just like the 17. The speakers, I want to say that they're the same because on paper they have like the same technical specifications, but these sound different. I think the 17 sound better. It could just be like an acoustical engineering difference on the inside, just bigger space in there. I couldn't tell you, but they do sound slightly different. They are still way better than the old XPS 15 speakers though. Now inside, we're looking at 2 NVMe slots, 2 RAM slots with baked-on Wi-Fi. The battery has shrunk down. It used to be a 97 watt hour. This is now an 86 watt hour, and it comes in at the same weight as last year's model. They're both 4.5 pounds. So this new one is actually a little bit denser than the previous one. The thermal system on the 15 does not use a vapor chamber. Maybe it's just like a smaller chassis, or maybe they didn't want to sacrifice too much vertical height, but it's a bit of a shame. This does have an improved thermal system over the old one. It is equipped with a better GPU, the 1650 Ti Max-Q now, and it's running their new Gore thermal material, but my early impressions of the XPS 15 is that it's not as impressive of a solution as the vapor chamber that's inside the XPS 17. Now, you're gonna have to wait for my full reviews on both of these devices to get like a final read on this, but my early take is that this is gonna be very impressive. This is gonna be as expected. Now, some kind of ancillary thoughts. Both of these are one-hand openable, if that's your jam. Like, you know, some people talk about this stuff like it's like the greatest thing in the world. Here's the thing. a hinge, like that whole ability to open it up with one hand, it takes good engineering to do it. Like if you make it too loose, yeah, you can open it one hand, but then it just like flops down and that's just a bad hinge. And if you make it too stiff, then you can't one hand open it. So this is good to see that on both of these devices. I really would have loved to have seen AMD inside these things. Like that would have changed the game. But we still have these awesome laptops that look amazing. And this is the first iteration or generation of these new designs, right? Maybe in a couple of years we get AMD variants. Maybe, please, Dell, can we make that happen? Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it. See you guys next time.